Hello, good morning, good afternoon, welcome. I'm very pleased to be joined by Marcello Leonardo. Marcello is part of the finance advisory team at EIB, working on climate finance, and specifically we'll be speaking at the SAF Congress, the Sustainable Aviation Futures Congress, which is fast approaching us, 7th to 9th of June in Amsterdam. So welcome, Marcello.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. So a lot happening in SAF. I think, as we just mentioned, or you just mentioned, it is the sort of sexy topic of the moment. Before we sort of dive into SAF, maybe to give us a little bit of a taste of your experience and a sort of thumbnail biography. You've obviously been involved in finance for over 15 years, but across both sort of private sector and in emerging markets, and now obviously with a multilateral. So maybe just give your own snapshot of your biography, please.
Yes, so my name is Marcello Leonardi, and I work at the EIB Advisory Services. I have my background, my career is in banking. I've worked in banking, specifically project finance, for over 15 years. My career began in London, working for different large European banks. When the Eurozone crisis hit, my then employer had to shut down. So with my wife and I, we decided to try our luck in Latin America. And I spent 8 years there financing large-scale infrastructure programs. And 2021, we decided to move back to Europe. And I started at the EIB Advisory Services, where I work with innovative clean tech companies to help them access financing, both from the EIB and from the private sector.
Yeah, it's funny actually, because there's a parallel with my path, because after the great financial crisis hit, most of the support mechanisms in Europe for renewable energy, we focused on Latin America, and particularly 2012, 2017 worked pretty much exclusively in building up renewable energy capacity via our events across the whole Latin America. So I tracked your journey. Brings us to SAF today. Obviously, it's April 2023 while we're talking, and we've seen hopefully the package around Refuel EU and some clear indications and compliance markets being created for SAF. Biofuels is a subject that we've tracked personally since 2005 and 6. So there's been a number of attempts to scale biofuels, and biofuels is obviously a component of road transport fuels today across Europe. And there have been successful pathways and developments of biorefineries that produce biofuels. But give us your perspective around, I guess, some of the challenges now facing, specifically, I guess, decarbonization of aviation, but also, you mentioned before, to not forget, obviously, we've got maritime fuels and some others. So there could be some, I guess, cross-fertilization, if that's the right word, with some of the other sustainable liquid fuels.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, if the EU is to achieve its ambitious 2030 and 2050 climate targets, obviously there will have to be a substantial decarbonization of the transport sector. And while, let's say, for some modes of transport, the experts tell us that there are already commercially available options, such as electrification for road vehicles, aviation is one of those hard to abate sectors, as they call them. Now, over recent years, there have been discussions about hydrogen and electrification, also of aviation, but currently there aren't any, let's say, commercial solutions available on the market. So the industry has been increasingly looking at SAF as an option. Now, obviously, in my mind, there are 4 challenges to SAF, to the uptake of SAF in aviation. The first is the perception amongst lenders in the sector that some of the pathways to producing SAF are technologies which are still unproven, and so there's a feeling that there's a high degree of technological risk, and of course that can impede financing being secured. The second reality is that currently SAF is more expensive than the traditional fossil fuel fuels, which is another impediment to their uptake. And third is, amongst some policymakers, there are concerns that looking at the SAF which is required in the future, that in Europe, the inputs to produce SAF won't be sufficient. And here I'm talking both about biomass for biofuels, but also renewable electricity for e-fuels. And the last challenge is, once these fuels are produced, to make sure that they comply with the EU taxonomy so they can be considered renewable fuels, because of course that is a crucial component for them to be purchased by the aviation sector and used. So those are the four main challenges. And as we were discussing earlier, as I mentioned, challenges can also bring opportunities. And so on a personal level, having followed the discussions of SAF in the EU, I see that there's a favorable regulatory framework which is being created. And as I mentioned, we saw it with the proposals from the Commission, Fit for 55, and now the discussions around the aviation quotas for the fuel, the trilogue discussions between the Commission, the Parliament, and the Council. So what you see is a favorable framework being set up. And that's important because when you read the market studies, they mention that due to the price differential, much of the SAF demand in the short to medium term will be driven by regulation.
By compliance,
by compliance with regulation. So if you have a favorable regulatory framework, which is incentivizing the use of SAF, then demand will follow. And of course,
just the one question on that incentives and I guess the European approach. Those incentives are obviously, I guess, forced to have a SAF component, as opposed to incentives that are, financial in terms of subsidy. And are there any thoughts around those, I guess, carrot and stick approach?
Well, you sort of have the two approaches, and you can see it between the EU and the US now with the IRA.
Yeah, exactly.
So there are two, let's say, approaches which reflect, I guess, the political realities in each of the blocks, so to say. I mean, both can be considered as valid, and both, on a personal level, I think will incentivize the use of SAF.
Yeah.
I mean, what we know for sure is that we need to decarbonize aviation and fairly quickly, if EU is going to achieve its targets. So the question is how.
Yeah.
We chose one path. The US has chosen another.
Yeah, that's the way it is. Sorry, please sort of go on around. I guess the regulation being fit for purpose to help, I guess, in investments going to actual infrastructure. Is that, and you see that happening in terms of the regulation that's proposed?
Well, the market experts definitely have come to the conclusion in the reports that we've read that the framework which is being created will drive demand. And also they conclude that where you have demand, you will have supply. So massive capacity rollout is required over the coming years. And as a result, also the financing will need to be provided. And that's, of course, where the EIB comes in. Because as I mentioned, these technologies are perceived as having a high degree of technological risk, yet they're required. So MDBs, or multilateral development banks like the EIB, have an important role to play. in such sectors. And this can be, this can be seen either by MDBs participating in the financing, so they're signaling to the market that that the projects that they're financing are bankable. But also if the MDBs provide innovative type of instruments which can mitigate certain risks that private sector lenders see. So I think MDBs can play an important role.
Yeah, in terms of I guess building capacity or building an appetite for private sector banks to partake in the financing. And do you foresee the EIB financing on the equity side or the debt side or a mezzanine, or and maybe unpick a little bit about I think the term is the sort of new instruments or other potential mechanisms that can help unlock private capital?
Well, the EIB has already financed, or it's already active, let's say, in the SAF, or what we call sustainable liquid fuel sector. As I was mentioning earlier to you, we participated recently in the financing of an advanced biorefinery being built by Repsol in Cartagena, Spain. And in terms of the instruments that the EIB has available, well, the EIB has a range of lending instruments which span from corporate to let's say more venture debt. And then EIB being part of the EIB group, which includes the EIF, which is the European Investment Fund, our sister organization, they also invest in equity and venture capital. Not directly, but through funds managed by professional fund managers. So the EIB group as a whole can offer a range of products from the very early stage to the sort of more mature stage. So we have a range of instruments to deploy. We don't have instruments that say specifically focused on specific technology risks. So really, it's a range of products that we have to make available to projects.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the multiple pathways to creating SAF, and indeed, I guess just the complex landscape out there, including e-fuels now. How do you avoid picking winners? And you mentioned you don't have any specific allocations for technology routes, but yeah, it is obviously we're seeing some specificity, if that's the right word, around the e-fuels component, which I guess is welcome, because that is another order of challenge in terms of cost and technology readiness in terms of the trying to get e-fuels off the ground. So yeah, what are some of your thoughts around, I guess, the complexity of the landscape and the sheer multitude of potential pathways and technologies?
Well, the EIB, we don't, we try to be technology agnostic. So we take a more holistic view of a project. So the various risks, including technology risk, but also all the other components that make up project risk. So we try to have a holistic view. And also, of course, what's important are the counterparties and the promoters, so for example, if we've seen cases where higher level or more, let's say, newer type of projects have been financed, but possibly on a more corporate balance sheet level. But that doesn't mean, but we've also financed other projects more on non-recourse level. So it really depends on the projects, the specifics of the project. One thing I will say, though, is that, of course, the EIB has to comply with certain criteria in terms of sustainability. So there's certain types of projects which we cannot do. For biofuels, it's those that use crop-based inputs.
Okay.
So again, that's also linked now to the EU taxonomy. So
Yeah.
you can find online at the EIB website or what our limits are. But in terms of, do you prefer e-fuels compared to advanced biofuels? We take a holistic view of a project.
Yeah, but specifically crop based and the potential for land use change is sort of, I guess, out of the financing lens or scope. But yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating area, and obviously there's lots to debate. There's hopefully, from what you're saying, clear movement towards, I guess, the first wave of financings being able to begin rolling out in terms of biorefineries, specifically for the sort of SAF area. There are some other work that you're doing to try and unravel the complexity of this, and the sheer scale is also, I guess, worth mentioning in terms of if you think about the next 20 years of trying to decarbonize, just aviation is huge, is it not? In terms of, people are talking about 2,000, some people are talking about 5,000 biorefineries, each one costing $1 to $2 billion or billion euros. What is some of your thoughts in that context?
Well, of course, let's say the hard to abate modes aren't only limited to aviation. You also have maritime. Now you have a debate in Europe about whether these type of sustainable liquid fuels can also be used in road. So it obviously the sector goes beyond just aviation, and it's very complex both from the technology point of view, but also because it's a sector which it's evolving as we in real time. So the EIB currently is about to start a study on the what we call SLF, so sustainable liquid fuel sector in Europe, to try to understand where we currently are in terms of regulation, demand, and where it's projected to go. But more importantly, we want the opportunity to talk to market participants in the industry to understand how they see things, how they see it evolving, and most importantly, what, let's say, limits or barriers to financing they perceive, and what potential solutions are needed in order to mitigate or to eliminate those risks or to facilitate the financing. So this is something which will be kicking off in the coming weeks and months.
Excellent, Marcello. Well, thanks a lot for sharing your thoughts. Fascinating area, lots to do, lots of detail, lots of complexity. As I said, you're going to be speaking at the SAF Congress, the 7th to 9th of June. You're going to be on one of the panels looking at finance with some of your private sector colleagues at BNP Paribas, Standard Chartered, and Soc Gen. So a rich debate, lots to discuss, and hopefully we can get the financing flowing, because with no money there is no industry. So many thanks, Marcello. It's great chatting to you. I look forward to meeting you in Amsterdam.
Okay, thank you very much.
Cheers. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.